Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to our review of Scream. Yes, we are sitting here in the presence of a YouTube great up-and-comer, Evan from Rockland Graves. How are you doing, man?
Good, thank you. That was an overly friendly intro. I appreciate it.
I gotta goose everybody up and say, come back to our show, please. We
Oh
we
yeah,
will
no,
always
I
be
really appreciate you guys bringing me on. This is really cool. I've never done
yeah.
anything like this.
Um,
I
yeah,
will preface, I apologize for my voice. If you want to know what I normally sound like, subscribe. Um, yeah, I'm sick. So
all good, all good. Yeah, I discovered your channel. I think like we just were talking in the intro before we hit record. Right around the time Halloween Ends was coming out, I was really impressed with your work, so I hit the subscribe button, and I've just been kind of following you. So I figured, we want to start doing some collaborations with a couple of channels, and you were definitely top of my list. So thank you for coming on and talking some Scream with us.
of
So I'm
course,
I'm
yeah.
happy to say, we got Scream 6 right around the corner, and Luke and I were talking about this a couple months back. I know we said I wanted to say let's do the whole series, but Luke's like, no, 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 no,
No,
slow
no,
down,
not happening.
slow down. We got
He made
another
me
movie coming out.
he made me sit through we had to do Silent Night, Deadly Night for Christmas, and we had to do them all, and
Did
it
you
was
do all
just
of
a
them?
horrible experience. And then I was like, you know what? We're not doing this. We're
Did you
we're
watch
starting to
one and
take
two back to back, where two is basically half of it's just like showing footage from the first movie?
No,
what
we
a
didn't. We
Okay, that's
we
good.
watched one because we'd never seen them, so it's one of those things
Oh,
where it's like,
really?
yeah, we
Mhm.
watched the
So,
first one, and then we started watching two, and it's like, well, damn, this is we could have
yeah.
just watched this movie, and
I don't
everything
want to
would have been fine.
derail too much, but me and my buddy have we watch Silent Night Deadly Night every year. But we have a different name for it because we were drinking when we were watching it for the first time. And there's a scene when he kicks down the door and he goes, "Punish." And my friend goes, "Did he say hummus?"
Hummus, nice.
So now we just refer to that movie as hummus, and I pass that knowledge on to everyone out there who wants to share in this tradition.
Perfect. Yeah, when you get to the fifth installment, especially.
I just got the box set of the Blu-ray trilogy.
Oh, geez,
Oh
really?
man.
I'm sorry, man. Those are some of the weaker ones. But
I
the fifth
know.
one's not bad. But there is a character named Pino. I won't spoil anything for you, man. But when you watch it, message us. Let us know what
Yes.
you thought,
Okay.
because that is interesting. There is a
Okay.
We'll have a
sequence in
discussion.
that movie.
Yeah.
Oh
All
my
right.
god, it is wild. But
That's a podcast for December.
there you go. We're here to discuss Scream from 1996. It's the Wes Craven seminal classic, I would say. I mean, like, this guy, just to talk a little bit about Wes Craven off the top here. I mean, the dude is, I think, probably one of, if you're talking like John Carpenter as like the main icon of horror, like at least in our opinion. I don't know about you, but this guy's probably right next to him, I would say. I mean, you got Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, and then even going back a little bit further, you've got things like Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes. And I mean, just for a guy who, we had even talked a couple Sunday Scaries back when we covered his birthday last spring, for someone who was kind of didn't want to get pigeonholed in horror, he really revolutionized the genre, like time and time again. So it's kind of exciting. I mean, how do you guys feel about Wes Craven? We'll start off with Evan there.
I mean, what is there to say about Wes Craven, right? Like,
Hmm.
you are absolutely right. It's one of those names where he's right next to John Carpenter, is one of the most influential, groundbreaking directors, and he kept doing it too. Like, there were so many times where he's put out movies that just like broke the mold of what was understood at the time. Like, even during the slasher boom in the '80s, when Nightmare on Elm Street came out, that was different from any of the other slashers that were coming out. He's so good at taking things that are in the zeitgeist and doing something creative with them, but there's still that DNA that people love about the genre. And he just kills it every time, man. Hills Have Eyes is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I
I
own
love
the
that
Arrow
movie.
copy, but Luke, I know you have a couple of Wes Craven films that aren't always talked about as some of your favorites,
He's done
especially
a lot.
People Under the Stairs is one
Oh
that you
man,
talk about constantly.
yeah, for me, Wes, you talk about John Carpenter, and something like the term of masters of horror is really thrown around a lot, I think, nowadays, which for like a lot of current directors. But like when you look at it in hindsight, and we sit here in 2023, you look at guys like John Carpenter and Wes Craven, who really paved the way for something different in the horror spectrum, where it's like they did groundbreaking stuff, you know. Wes Craven, I mean, I have a love for Swamp Thing.
Yeah,
Also, People Under the Stairs is something that, you know, I'm so eager to talk about on the podcast. I think that's started getting some love. You know, when you're cruising Twitter, you start seeing people mentioning that more and
It
more.
just
But
got a new release, didn't it? Did Scream
yeah, I
Factory
think
pick
it
it
just
up?
yes,
came out on 4K.
yep, 4K, and
Mhm.
that's easily one I'm picking up because it's something that
I need
you
to
know I
see it.
think
I've never seen it.
yeah, and I think it's like a big blind spot in a lot of people's you know, that horror filmography, which it's definitely worth a look. There's a good commentary there as well. But then I mean, obviously we talk about Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's like that one came out what after I think what Halloween 3 had already done its thing,
I
and they're like,
believe so.
well, the audience, you know, wasn't for it. Friday the 13th was already doing its thing, and they were already deep in the installments. And then here comes Wes Craven with A Nightmare on Elm Street, giving us something completely new.
Yeah.
And for me as a kid, that volume of horror was turned up to 10 because I could not sleep after watching some of those installments.
Hmm.
And it was just something unique and really did put a different spin on the horror genre and the slasher genre in itself. And then, you know, we get into New Nightmare, and it's that meta version of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which then again paves the way for what we're talking about, Scream. You know, so
That
it's
dude
like,
even broke the mold of his own franchise.
and
Yeah,
it's like you never talk about that stuff. You know, it's like when you look at Wes Craven's career, this guy has done so much for horror that, you know, I think a lot of horror fans talk about it, but it's like when you sit down and you think about it, it's like this guy revolutionized a lot of things in the horror realm.
absolutely. And I mean, you bring up even some of his misses. Like, you know, I know a lot of people talk bad about Cursed, but I actually think that that movie's pretty damn entertaining for a werewolf flick. And, you know, those are pretty middling. We talk about werewolves constantly between Luke and I. So
Yeah,
it's
they're
one of those
great.
things where it's like, we want to see them kind of get their due in the modern day. But, you know, I would kill to see that original cut because like the story behind Cursed is just so tragic, and just how like that movie got cut to shit by the studio. There's apparently an entirely different version of the film, very Zack Snyder's Justice League-esque on that. So, you know, the guy, he just killed it with damn near every horror film he released. And Scream, I mean, it basically saved the slasher genre in the
Yeah.
90s. Like if there's anything we can say and that has been said, is like it's that. Like
Kevin
without
Williamson had a
Scream,
lot of slashers in the 90s. He
oh
had a
yeah.
lot to do with that resurgence.
And we don't know where we would be at this point with it. I mean, like, I don't think you get the big slasher remake boom, which, you know, for some, you know, some are great, some are not so great. But I think that we kind of need all of these dominoes to fall to end up where we are in, you know, the modern day 2020 to 2023 now, where it's like we've kind of been on a great run for, I'd say even before 2020, maybe even 2016 up to now, with a lot of really strong horror filmmakers emerging and bringing us some really great work. And I think that, you know, you got to go back to where that first domino starts. And I think that that comes to with Scream, where it just kept it alive. It just resuscitated it just enough to get that heartbeat moving. And then as it's been going, it's been slowly going up and up.
And then Michael Bay remade every slasher movie in the early 2000s.
Absolutely. I want to do a video talking about Platinum Dunes at some point, just to kind of dive into that and just kind of see, because I think there are some gems in there.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree.
But we are here. Let's talk some Scream. So, you know, when was everybody's first exposure to this? I know we kind of talked about it a little bit. I'll say, starting things off for me, I didn't see this movie until Scream 4 was about to come out. So this was back in like 2011. You know, I talk about being a kid who had just kind of really gotten into horror by that point. 2 years prior, with the Friday the 13th remake, really set me over the edge. And, you know, this was a movie my dad had always been trying to get me to watch. And we had it on VHS. I remember the cover. It was the blue VHS cut where she's in blue and she's holding her face. and I'd always just kind of passed over it. It just didn't like scream, you know, I guess, sorry. But it didn't shout to me, this is going to be a great horror movie, just because it was just her on the cover. But he was just kind of like, you got to watch this. Scream 4 is coming out. We're going to go see it. And I did. And man, I did not expect the kind of movie that I was in for. Like, I thought, you know, oh, it's just a dude in a mask. It's not like Jason where he's coming back from the dead, or Freddy who's killing people in his nightmares. But no, I was completely shocked just by how entertaining and crazy it was, where I'm like, you can have a murder mystery in a horror film? Like, what the hell? Like, it really just, I mean, it made me rethink kind of the way horror can be structured from a young age. And I think it really opened some bigger doors for me going forward. And Evan, we'll go to you next. What was your first exposure with Scream?
You know, you give a year. I don't think I could give a year to it, but I definitely remember my first time seeing it. I was similarly indoctrinated into horror by my dad. Pardon me. Halloween was the big one. So we were always watching the Halloween movies and other, you know, assorted horror films at the time. And I remember eventually it was like, well, if you're getting into the genre, Scream is kind of obligatory. You have to see this movie. And I remember I was pretty young, and it blew me away. There was something with Scream where it's a more grounded version of a slasher movie than what I was used to. Because a lot of the movies, you have these unstoppable, beastly, almost ghost-like killing machines. You know, Michael Myers, you can't kill him. Jason Voorhees is a similar thing. It's a big brooding thing. Freddy Krueger would killed you in your dreams. But Ghostface was just a guy you went to school with.
Corn syrup. Same stuff they use for pig's blood in Carrie.
Surprise, Sydney.
And I remember that concept, and we're not getting into spoilers yet, I'd imagine, but I remember the end of it specifically scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I very much remember how I felt seeing the end of that movie for the first time, and it really, really disturbed me. That's why it's stuck in my head so much. But it's a classic, man.
And then Luke, go ahead and let us know, when did you first check out Scream?
Well, you know, this one is a lot of our viewers and listeners know I grew up ingrained with horror in my DNA. So it was something that, you know, as a little kid, I was watching a lot of horror films. And my brother, there's an age difference. So it's about 8 years. So he would always be ordering movies on pay-per-view. So I remember it had to be, you know, it was a spring day, had to be probably, I would say, May of 1997 when this came out in December 96. You know, and little 8-year-old Luke is sitting there and they would have, anytime the pay-per-views would come out, it wouldn't be like, you know, random start time. It would either be, you know, like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And this one was, I remember, 6 o'clock start time. 8-year-old Luke's in there with his Domino's pizza, and at 6 o'clock, Scream starts, and Drew Barrymore's making the popcorn, and I mean, a great spring evening, and I am there sitting terrified. It's like that opening, absolutely enthralling. It's one of the strongest openings. I don't even say in horror. I would say in probably filmmaking in general, because it's just something absolute thrill ride in just for the first few minutes, and it's like at that point, I was hooked. You know, so it's like. Just sitting there, I find myself, even if you don't have time to watch the whole film, I always go back and I'll watch that cold open, because it's just something that sets the tone for a film that you don't see outside. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And we can kind of just dive right into that then. Like, now that we've talked about our first experiences, I mean, we're all fans of the opening. I don't think there's anybody who could really fault it in any way. So much to the point where it's like, as we kind of continue on with this series, it's been one of those things where, you know, on another film we're going to discuss in another video, hint, it is, it's kind of recreated in a sense. And it's just so impactful. And just, again, you got somebody like Wes Craven, who has learned from greats like, you know, Alfred Hitchcock and other horror and other filmmakers that he's just grown up with, to be like, I want to take a massive star. And Drew Barrymore in 96, I mean, like, she's the little girl from E.T. She's the little girl from Firestarter. You know, she's all grown up now. Let's watch her, like, kind of being our so what final girl that a lot of people would probably assume. Like, let's see her interact with this killer and everything. But what if we murdered her? What if we gutted her like a fish at the beginning of the film? And it's just one of those things where it's like, I think for a lot of audiences, people didn't expect that, because even the marketing material, she is like first and foremost on the poster.
Center,
yeah. And it's like, you know, you don't have Nev Campbell as kind of like on the poster so predominantly. So everybody going into this film, I think, kind of expects Drew Barrymore to be the lead. So it's like, it's such a shocker. And then even for me growing up, knowing who Drew Barrymore is, because again, my father's a big horror fan. He got me into it, but he's also an even bigger Adam Sandler fan. And they had, of course, a couple of great collaborations over the years with Wedding Singer, 50 First Dates. So watching Drew Barrymore get gutted was one of those things where it's like, oh my God, like this is something else. And it's just one of the greatest openings of all time. I mean, it's we've said it already, but it's like so scary. It really locks you in.
It's chilling. It captures that like sense of being trapped so well. Like, it's terrifying because as an audience now, obviously we know as soon as she picks up that phone, she's fucked. She's not aware of that. She's having this conversation, and it builds. It takes a while before he actually reveals that there's something wrong. Like, they have a lengthy chat about movies before anything actually goes wrong. But that whole time, you're sitting there, heart pounding, because you know that she's just like this sitting duck.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween.
And that there's someone lurking around that she's not ready for what's going to happen. That just the sense of dread in that opening scene was so well realized, especially when her parents come home.
Yeah. And they're just right around the corner. The car pulls in.
That like desperate yell she tries to make, but she can't quite get it out. Oh man, pulls at your heart.
And then when they pick up the phone, the mother's hearing her on the other end of her being dragged, and then we get that cut, and it's just like they run out the door, and she's just hanging straight from the tree. It's like
it's such a masterfully executed sequence.
And it's one of those things where Dylan talked about, where it's like you look at Drew Barrymore and you think, oh, she's going to be, you know, the main protagonist of this film, and we kill her right at the beginning, and the audience, it still puts you on the edge of your seat. You're like, wait a minute, all my expectations just got thrown out the window. And I mean, we get this even later as the unveiling with Billy Loomis and Stu Macher, and it's like you're thinking one thing of one of these characters, and then it pops up, and nope. You know, it's all been a facade, and it's pig's blood and all this stuff. And it's like this film, again, Wes Craven, Kevin Williamson, it's just on another level of filmmaking where it really did step up the horror game in what we were expecting from a filmmaker as well as a screenwriter.
You're crazy, both of you.
Actually, we prefer the term psychotic.
We'll never get away with this.
Oh, no? Tell that to Cotton Weary. You wouldn't believe how easy he was to frame. Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
Yeah, and that's one of the things before we I want to dive into Kevin Williamson a little bit here, because, I mean, just as much as Wes Craven, he is to thank for this series. And I think a lot of what happened with 90s horror, you know, for better and for worse, but it's one of those things where the thing that got me in this go around to seeing that opening again, just really trying to sit down and kind of put my critic cap on and analyze this. Like, of course, I'm not going to sit there and be like, well, this didn't age well or anything. It's like, it's a bona fide classic. I love this movie. You can't do that with me. But it's one of those things where it's like, what can I take away that is so special? And it is that sequence of just the slip of the tongue from the our killer, Ghostface, where it's just like, I want to know who I'm looking at. And you said it, it's just one of those things where it's like, it just
Goosebumps.
hits me in such a different way this time of watching, where I'm just like, oh my God, like knowing what you know after seeing the film, it's like, was it an accident or was it intentional? And it's just like, if it's Billy on the phone, it's intentional. If it's Stu, maybe it was an accident. And that's the beauty of going back and rewatching this film. I think that this one, especially in this series, is damn near endlessly rewatchable. But yeah, to kind of dive into Kevin Williamson himself a little bit. I mean, this guy had been trying to break into Hollywood for a little while when he kind of came across and wrote and brought up Scream. I'm pretty sure. Like, I'm just trying to pull up his writing credits right now.
I know he was doing what, Teaching Mrs. Tingle, I think, and they were kind of, it was put
I Know
on
What
ice.
You Did Last Summer was one that he was trying to pitch at that time. Yeah, but his first credit for writing is Scream. So this is the one that finally caught with the studios, where they were like, hey, this could be great. Let's give this to Wes Craven. Let's have him do some touch-ups and things, and let's see what you got, kid. And boy, I mean, what a run for him as well in the 90s, because we got things like Scream. Obviously, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is another one from our conversation earlier that seems to be getting a legacy sequel. So it's something where it's like, even that's coming back to it. But then you've got things like The Faculty. And again, I talked about Cursed a little bit. I think that film has a little bit more to offer. And it's just like, the guy, he's got like this pedigree now of being this fantastic horror writer with a twist. You know, he's always going to bring some kind of a grounded modern take to his horror writing. And like I said, for better or for worse, if you put Kevin Williamson's name on it, it's going to perk people up. And I think that that's very rare for people who are just credited as primarily writers in Hollywood. And
yeah, you don't usually hear about people who are just writers. Not only people who are going to know the name of a writer, but even people who don't deep dive on horror or film. They're probably going to know the name Kevin Williamson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that he's definitely someone you got to credit massively with this, especially for writing these characters and just like kind of diving into them now. I mean, our cast, again, all young actors at the time, but it's very stacked if you look at it by today's standards, with like Nev Campbell, Courtney Cox, Skeet Ulrich, David Arquette. Absolutely. Luke and I are huge fans. We got two man crushes in here from us with him, and of course Matthew Lillard. We're big Matthew Lillard fans on the channel.
How lucky
here.
are we that we got a movie with both of those guys in it?
I know, right? Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, I think that probably ups the points for us. But again, we spoke about Drew Barrymore. And then even Jamie Kennedy, who I think gives so much life. And really, if you're a horror movie fan, Jamie Kennedy is like your vessel in this. But like, yeah, if you guys had to pick a character in this movie to identify with the most, or even just a person that is just endlessly, rewatchable for you in this film, who would you go with, Evan?
I mean, man, I have to go with Dewey. I love Dewey, and David Arquette's performance is just so good.
You look awfully young to be a police officer.
I'm 25 years old.
You know, in a demographic study, I proved to be most popular amongst males 11 to 24. I guess I just missed you. Of course, you don't look a day over 12, except in that upper torso area. Does the force require you to work out?
No, ma'am. Because of my boyish good looks, muscle mass has increased my acceptance as a serious police officer.
I think that his arc over the franchise is the most interesting. And David Arquette has such a unique acting style that makes that such a distinct character. Obviously, Jamie Kennedy is also one of my favorites, because as you said, he's like the vessel for horror movie fans watching the movie, where often, you'll be saying things to your friends, but like he's saying it for you. So you just get to kick back when you're watching Scream. You're like, I'll let him do the talking.
I think it's her father. Why can't they find her pops, man? Because he's probably dead. His body will come popping up in the last reel somewhere. Eyes gouged out, fingers cut off, teeth knocked out. See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they'd watch Prom Night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
I don't need to do anything here, which is really fun. But I think for me, it's got to be Dewey.
And then Luke, who you going with? I kind of have an idea, but I want to hear it.
Yeah, so I mean, like, it just giving the rundown of this cast list, and I'm talking about like making the most out of so many unproven actors at that time. I mean, another reason why Scream is such a unique film of its own, because you don't really see that, where it's like you just see so much potential in all these actors. And I mean, who I'm going with, it's got to be Matthew Lillard. This dude is just on another level. Like, you know, where you look at this, and I remember when this film came out, and like everyone looked at Skeet Ulrich like, oh, you know, he's a heartthrob, he's a good-looking guy of this, and it's like looking back on that, it's like Matthew Lillard is just from charisma alone gives Skeet Ulrich a run for his money in terms of like being the heartthrob of this movie, because it's just like, you know, it's this really tall, good-looking guy, and this the charisma that he has, that he delivers a lot of these lines. Like the one line where they're sitting by the, I think it's the fountain at the school, and he's making jokes where he says liver alone, and it's like, you know, no one's laughing, and he's like, it's because he thinks like they don't get the joke, so he
just keeps pushing it in. Yeah,
and it's like it's
liver, it's liver, it's a joke.
Just getting mad, right? Better liver alone. Liver alone. Ow, liver. It was a joke.
and like there's a moment in there where he sticks out his tongue when he's like looking over at Billy, and it's just like the charisma that he exudes. And even toward the end where he gets hit with the phone and he's talking about peer pressure and all these, just the delivery from Matthew Lillard, it's just perfect. And
he's
really
probably the best performance in the movie. I will agree there. I think he's the best performance.
I
in the
think
movie
so
by far.
too. I gotta agree with you there on that, Evan, because like he's a little bit more out there than anybody else in the cast. I think like the only person kind of matching his energy is probably Jamie Kennedy in the paranoia aspect, but like he's just so, especially in the rewatch, you can kind of tell just how much fun he is having with this, but he's also, I don't think, fully realizing the consequences of his actions. So it's like he's kind of borderlining that he's a little bit dumb, but also not so dumb that he's not dangerous. You know, he's still got enough of that on his shoulders to where it's like, yeah, he can definitely,
he's in the most dangerous spot.
What he's up to. Yeah, and it's like he is likable. Again, I go back to, now we're kind of skipping towards the end of the film here, but when everything's going down in the house, and you know, just after the camera guy gets his throat slashed, and you know, Nev Campbell's going up to the house with the gun, and you know, Jamie Kennedy's there, and he's all injured and stuff, and he's just sitting there like, or running up to her and saying, you know, like, oh God, Sid, we got to get out of here, and she doesn't trust him. But then to see Stu come up and be like, it's him, like, you can't do this, what are you doing, Sid? Like, it's just so twisted.
Who did it? Billy, shoot Mike! Who did it? No, I didn't! Please give me that gun! Give me that gun, guys, man! No, I didn't! No, I didn't, Sid! He did it! He did it, Sid did! Please, I didn't do it! He did it, please! Please, Cindy, oh! Fuck you both! Please! Oh,
and again, I think like your description of this ending, you know, it's one of those things where I never really considered just how horrifying it is, because I always get so caught up in the performances and just the characters and the actors themselves. But like, to think about that, especially in the modern context that we have, you know, with the tragedies that our schools in the US face, and you know, just the fact that it's like, yes, you could be walking around a high school with a murderer, you know, you don't know. That is some scary shit. And to see them kind of twist the knife literally and figuratively towards the end of this film, it's impressive acting, it's impressive writing, but it is one of those things too where it's like, God damn, like when you really sit back and think about it, it's fear on a totally different level than we're used to seeing with a slasher.
I'm really glad I have that memory of what it was like the first time, because now when I watch it, I'm like you, where I'm just admiring the craft of it. But then always in the back of my head, there's still that first viewing of it where it was so disturbing because it felt too real. It's so well realized. It feels like you're watching something that actually happened.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, is hard to keep as the films go on, but definitely with this first film, it definitely does feel like, if you were to tell me that this was based off of exaggerated, but based off a true story, I could believe it. I could definitely see it.
It's super grounded.
And one of my favorite things is I did not watch the film in prep for this, so I'm going off the top of my head, so I can't do it verbatim. But when Billy Loomis says, you know, horror movies don't create killers; they teach killers to be more creative.
He's sick, for fuck's sake. You've seen one too many.
Now, Sid, don't you blame the movies. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
And it's just like, it's us being horror fans. You know, how many times are we sitting there watching a horror film saying, you know, I want to do it like that. I would do it like this, you know? So it's on another level of growing up and loving horror. You're like, I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, the sick truth, but I'm sure it goes through everybody's head at least once or twice. But yeah, I think that it's definitely, as far as, you know, horror stepping into this meta universe, I mean, this is probably the gold standard of that style of genre when it comes to horror blending. You know, I just think that there's a lot of films that have attempted it that just never really get to this level. And I just don't know if even the series can get back to this level. I think that the sequels are fine, like they're great. But it is one of those things where it's like, this is so pure. This is definitely, you could tell, a labor of love from everybody involved. And at this point in time, like even watching it by today's standards, it's got that 90s like feel to it, but it never feels like, I always talk to Luke about movies that kind of fall too deep into, okay, this feels like it's from 2006, or this feels like it was made in 95. You know, it's honestly, and I know this is going to be really broad and some people are going to rip me up in the comments for this, but to me, I look at this on the same level of like a Jurassic Park or a Jaws, where it's like, you could watch this movie again and again. And honestly, the message, the performances, everything, the presentation, it is damn near timeless because it just sucks you in so well.
Yeah.
And you just get really embraced with these characters, even all the side characters, like Henry Winkler as the principal. Like, I really found myself disturbed by his death this time around. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's so vicious. And it's just like, he really cared about his students. And it's like, it's one of those things, I feel like I always push that off when I watch this movie, but I was really taken aback this time watching it.
That scene was actually added in.
I know.
Because there was too much time between deaths. And they were like, oh, we got to put something in there. But it's such an effective scene. I remember what it was. They needed a way to get the kids out of the house at the end of the movie. So they added that scene into there. And it's interesting because that was something that wasn't in the original script, but it feels so
natural.
Perfect. Yeah, it doesn't feel like shoehorned in at all. And I agree, it's very disturbing because he really cares for his students. Like, he felt like a legit dude, and then he gets fucking slaughtered.
And then how disturbing is it when they get the call that he's been hung from the goalpost, and they're like, well, let's go check it out before they take him down.
We gotta get over there, bro.
I don't know. I think it's just the time was before the internet really took off, so it's like you can't just get exposed to what you can. So it's like, yeah, this is their live leak. That's perfect.
It doesn't feel like it's out of place. It feels like, you know, probably after he was giving them shit with the Ghostface mask to begin with, it's like, I could see some kids going over there and doing that. But I mean, it's just something where it's like, especially the Henry Winkler I've known for as Fonzie from Happy Days, absolutely. You know, so it's like, being such an icon at that point, and then to kind of put him as the principal, and then to have an on-screen death as effective as that. I mean, again, making the most out of your cast, which is definitely what Scream does.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I think we're kind of coming down to the end, at least on our discussion here. We're definitely going to be covering Scream longer form on our podcast at some point down the road here. But again, with the new one coming out, we just wanted to get our thoughts out and talk, you know, just about this film and just what its importance is to the horror genre and why this, like Ghostface, you know, the mask and everything, it's up there with like Michael and Jason and Leatherface and all these icons. Like, it's like even more so now, it's like it surprises me that so many mainstream pieces of media, like we talk about, like, you know, video games like Call of Duty had Ghostface in it as a skin that you could get for Warzone. Like,
It's
what
so
the hell?
recognizable.
Yeah, it is iconic. And then
Yeah.
you have movies like Scary Movie that come out and they're parodying this. And it's one of those things where it just shows you the effect that a film like this has just on the culture at the time and how it shook things up. And really, I think one of the key points I do want to leave off on before we kind of wrap things up is just how this film did, because it really was kind of a lot like what we're seeing nowadays with these smaller releases in theaters, with like a Terrifier 2 in a sense, where it had its release and it was right before Christmas. Am I right, Luke? It was right around then, or it was Christmas.
I think it was slightly right before. I think
And
they didn't know what to do with
back there.
It's got this, it comes out, people go see it, and then that word of mouth makes this film explode. And then that's when everything kind of goes up. And we see that with Terrifier 2. We see that with you know, even some of these other films like Skinamarink and things like that that came out recently. It's nice to be back in that kind of a field, I guess, when it comes to cinema. It is. It is exciting to watch these films succeed week by week. And, you know, I would say this is one of those last really big horror films to do that before now. And what more can I say about Scream? It's a classic. It's one of the best of all time. It's a best for Wes Craven. It's a best for this cast. I mean, for me, I will watch this movie time and time again. I cannot wait until my son is old enough to experience this for the first time. You know, I look forward to it because, again, no matter how many sequels they make and no matter how many times like we bring back Ghostface or what contrived way we try to connect this story back to this, having this original film be so timeless is just one of those things where I'm just like, this is aces. It's cherry on top. I absolutely love Scream. And Evan, your closing thoughts?
I mean, you know, it's like what you said. What is there to say about this movie? Because when a movie this iconic, they get talked about just time and time again, it is hard to know what to say about them. Scream is absolutely iconic. Ghostface is one of the most recognizable horror villains. It's not one person, but it's one of the most recognizable killers in a horror movie ever. The twist is like one of the most famous horror movie twists of all time, to the point where like I don't know if anyone will ever be surprised by that again. Because it's so iconic that I feel like everyone knows that it's Billy and Stu going into the movie. It's a movie that broke the mold. It revitalized the slasher genre, and the world of horror would absolutely not be the same without this one movie. And I love it for that.
Absolutely. Luke, your closing thoughts?
You know, this one for me, like I said, growing up with horror in, you know, the forefront for me, this one was one of those pivotal films that I had seen. And like looking at this film, I wouldn't even necessarily say it was just for the horror or the slasher subgenre. I'd say even for horror, because it's like we messed around talking about Silent Night, Deadly Night. And you look at those later films that took place, you know, in the early 90s. And I would say that's pretty indicative of where the horror genre was, where it's like this thing was believed to be running on E. You know, we had Fumes going into the mid 90s, and
you had Candyman.
No one,
Candyman, that's true.
Candyman.
There are a couple of gems, but
yeah,
never anything.
I mean,
to that.
you know,
yeah,
you
no,
get a
at that,
skew.
it was gassing out.
But it's like, you know, they didn't really know where they were going here, and then it's like Scream comes along and really gives the horror genre a shot in the arm, and it's like, wait, there is a lot left in the tank here. And then we start seeing, I mean, you get some questionable stuff in the late 90s into the early 2000s, but like where we sit in 2023, as we've just talked about, the Outwater, Skinamarink, you look at a lot of the A24 stuff that's happened over the past few years, and those were just places where directors had those profound experiences. And I think Scream was one of those films to say, let's see unique storytelling. It's not just slash and gore. Let's put a lot of unique twists into the script, almost thriller-esque, and give us something new and fresh. And I think we're still feeling those effects here in 2023.
Couldn't agree more. But alrighty, guys, I think that's going to wrap us up here for our discussion with Scream. Evan, feel free to plug your channel. Let the folks know where they can find you. Thank you again for joining us for this video.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really glad that we did this. Yeah, so I also make horror movie reviews on here. I don't usually sound like this. I have a much more smooth and sultry voice most days. Yeah, Rockland Graves Productions. I am uploading bi-weekly right now. So it's a great time to jump over, check it out. I'm going through the Evil Dead series leading up to Rise, and then doing a few other things in between there. Got Evil Dead coming out very soon. Might actually be out by the time this is out.
Yeah, this will be going up on the 1st.
So this will be out the day before.
All right.
So that's
we'll
great.
Look forward to it.
So Evil Dead 2 review is out. Go check that out. Yeah, appreciate you guys for bringing me on. This has been really cool.
Absolutely. And of course, guys, you can follow us on all our social media at SplattercastPod, as well as Evan's there. I'm going to have it pop right up right now. Yeah, other than that, we got a lot of great stuff on the channel. Of course, at the end of the week here, we're going to be talking about Scream 6. So we got a lot of great stuff coming there. But we got one more video in the pipeline here with Evan. So coming up, actually, I'm a week ahead. By next week, next Wednesday, we're going to be talking Scream 5.
We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
Or just Scream again. I don't know. Whatever they decided to do. We talked about that. Yes, 5 Cream. Yeah, for a brief minute. But we're going to be covering that film. Luke and I are finally going to get our feelings out to that. We've been teasing it since we started the channel about how we kind of have an alternative opinion, I think, to the general experience of this film. We were kind of on it.
We might all be on the same page.
Okay, well, that's going to be an interesting conversation. So definitely keep your eye out for that. And of course, when Scream 6 hits, we're going to have a ton of content coming out for that. So we'll have a lot to look forward to. But until next time, guys, I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
Evan, you want to go ahead and say it?
I'm Evan from Rockland Graves.
And yeah, stay scared.